Sometimes the smallest things can shake our whole world. For Margaret, it was just a simple letter that arrived on a chilly fall morning. When she picked up her mail, she saw a light blue envelope with writing she knew right away. It was from her son, Thomas. Thomas never sent real letters anymore. He was always too busy with his job in the big city. He would always say he would call her soon, but the calls never came often enough. Margaret stood outside her small house by the beach, holding her cup of tea as it got cold. The morning mist floated through the tall trees around her cottage. The ocean wind blew softly through the branches. She opened the envelope quickly, thinking maybe Thomas was thanking her for the cookies she had sent him. But the letter said something very different. It had only one sentence. "Mum, I found someone you really need to meet. Can you come visit next weekend?" Margaret read the words over and over. Someone she needed to meet. Who would it be? Why would Thomas write this instead of calling? Thomas was her calm and steady son. He was thoughtful like his father David and determined like her. But this letter felt urgent and mysterious. She went inside, holding the letter tightly as if it might disappear. The old wooden floors creaked under her feet as she walked to her kitchen. The only sound was the quiet hum of her old refrigerator. For many years, silence had been her only friend. Ever since David died suddenly 12 years ago, the house felt too big and too empty. She had filled it with things that didn't need her attention. Books, clay pots she made, and soft classical music from the radio. But nothing could fill the empty space David left behind. Now this letter, with its strange and hopeful words, made her heart race with questions all morning. Margaret tried not to think too much about it. She told herself maybe Thomas had a girlfriend he wanted her to meet. But why write a letter instead of calling? Why did it sound so urgent? By the afternoon, she had packed a small bag for the trip. Her mind was spinning with thoughts. She watered her plants, fed her old dog, Buddy, and kept looking at the clock. Every minute felt like it was hiding a secret. On Friday morning, Margaret got on the train to the city. The ride was long, but her thoughts never stopped moving. Memories played in her mind like a movie. David's smile, Thomas's first day at school, the smell of fresh bread baking in their kitchen, all the small pieces of a life that once felt whole. As the train moved through green hills, Margaret looked at the letter again. Maybe Thomas had found one of David's old friends. Maybe there was something about David's past she never knew. She tried to push the thoughts away, but a small voice inside her whispered, "Your story isn't over yet." When the train finally stopped at the station, Thomas was waiting for her. He looked older than she remembered. His face was thinner and more tired, but his eyes still looked kind when he saw her. "Mum," he said, hugging her tight. His voice sounded warm but also nervous, like he was carrying something heavy, but didn't want her to worry. "It's been too long," she said, holding him closer. "You look skinny. Are you eating enough?" He smiled a little and brushed off her question. "You always ask me that." They walked to his car as the city lights started to glow in the evening. The streets were full of people rushing around, car horns honking and music playing from restaurants. But inside the car, everything was quiet. Thomas's fingers tapped on the steering wheel like he was worried about something. "So," Margaret said gently, "what is this all about?" He looked at her, then back at the road. "It's something you need to see. Someone you need to meet." She frowned. "Thomas, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I'll explain everything soon," he said quickly. "Just trust me, okay?" Trust. The word hung in the air like both a promise and a warning. They drove through narrow streets until they stopped in front of a brick building. The sign on the building said, "Seaside Gallery." Margaret blinked in confusion. "An art gallery?" Thomas nodded and got out of the car. "Yes, come on." Inside, the gallery had soft lights and quiet music. Paintings covered the white walls. Landscapes, pictures of people, scenes that felt strangely familiar. Margaret's heart started beating faster. She walked closer to one of the paintings. It showed a big coastal sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that painting style. She knew those brush strokes and that special way of mixing light and color. These were David's paintings. Her voice shook. Thomas, where did these come from? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he led her deeper into the gallery, past paintings of beaches, forests, and faces she almost recognized. Her hands trembled as she looked at one painting of a cottage at sunset. It looked just like their house. She could almost smell the salty ocean air and hear the waves. She could almost feel David standing beside her on the porch like he did years ago. Finally, Thomas stopped in front of a closed door. He turned to face her, looking very serious. Mom, he said quietly, there's something I haven't told you. Her heart beat faster. What is it? It's about Dad. The words hit her like a cold wave. She hadn't heard anyone say his name in that serious tone in years. All the memories she had locked away suddenly came rushing back. She stepped backward. Thomas, what are you talking about? Your father is gone. I know, he said, looking down at his shoes. But before he died, he left something behind. Something for you. Margaret stared at him. Left what behind? He paused. I found it a few months ago. I wasn't sure if you were ready to see it. Her voice cracked. Ready for what? He opened the door slowly. The room inside was small. In the center, under a soft light, stood a single painting covered with a white cloth. Thomas looked at her. He finished it. Margaret frowned. Finished what? He pulled the cloth away. Her breath stopped. It was her, a younger version of herself. Her hair was down. Her eyes were bright, and her smile was gentle. This was how she looked before life became hard. It was the portrait David had started painting many years ago, but never finished. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my goodness! Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. He said he couldn't finish it. He said he didn't know how to paint the way I looked at him. Thomas smiled sadly. I guess he figured it out eventually. She took a shaky step forward. The painting was beautiful and delicate, full of light. Every brush stroke showed love. But then, her eyes caught something strange on the back of the frame. There was faint writing in David's handwriting. She leaned closer and read out loud. For Margaret, the love that never faded, even in silence. Her knees felt weak. It was like hearing his voice again, soft and patient, full of the same quiet love she had missed for so long. Thomas handed her something else. It was a folded note, yellow and old at the edges. I found this behind the painting, he said. I think it's meant for you. She opened it with shaking fingers. But before she could read more than the first line, her eyes stopped at the date. It was written 3 months before David died. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thomas, this isn't written to me. He froze. What do you mean? She turned the letter toward him. In faded ink, it said, To the one who gave me a second chance. The words burned in her chest. Who was David writing to? What did it mean? Thomas's face turned pale. Mom, maybe there's more you should know. Her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. The room suddenly felt smaller and colder. What more? She whispered. Thomas hesitated, looking toward another door at the back of the room. There's someone here who can explain. Someone who knew Dad in ways I only recently found out about. Margaret's heart stopped. Who? Thomas looked at her, his voice low. The person he wrote that letter to. Her breath caught, sharp and shocked. She felt suspended between fear and heartbreak. The room went completely still, and in that frozen silence, the truth she had been waiting for finally began to come out. Thomas led her toward the back of the gallery. The air felt thick and heavy. It smelled like old paint and wood. Her fingers trembled as she followed him. Her thoughts were fighting each other. Shock, curiosity, fear, and disbelief all at once. A woman was standing near the far wall. She looked like she was in her late 50s, with grey and brown hair tied back neatly. When she turned around and saw them coming, Margaret felt something stir inside her. The woman's face looked strangely familiar, like a memory she couldn't quite remember. "Mum," Thomas said quietly, "this is Elizabeth." The woman smiled softly, but her eyes looked heavy, like they were carrying too many secrets. "Hello, Margaret," she said in a voice that was both calm and shaky. "I've wanted to meet you for a very long time." Margaret froze. "Do I know you?" Elizabeth hesitated. "Not exactly, but I knew your husband. We met years ago after his heart surgery. He used to come to my studio to paint and talk. He said you worried when he traveled far away, so he kept it private. He said he needed a quiet place to finish something special for you." Margaret's heart pounded. "He never told me about that." "I know," Elizabeth said gently. "He didn't want to worry you. But before he died, he left me something and asked me to give it back to his family when the right time came." Margaret looked at Thomas, her eyes wide with shock. "This is what you found?" He nodded. "Yes, the paintings, the letter. And there's more, Mom." Elizabeth walked toward a covered frame and lifted the cloth. Margaret's breath caught again. It was their house, the same porch, the same hills, the same soft evening light. But in the painting, David stood at the railing, looking up at the sky as if waiting for someone who never came. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He painted this after he knew." Elizabeth nodded. "After he knew his heart was failing. He told me he wasn't afraid to die. He was only afraid you would think he left things unfinished." Margaret wiped her tears. "He did leave things unfinished. He left me." Elizabeth's face softened. "He didn't want to. Every brushstroke in those paintings was his way of staying close to you." Silence filled the room. Margaret turned to Thomas. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Thomas sighed. "I didn't know how to. I thought it would hurt you more than help you." She shook her head. "No, Thomas. For 12 years I've been wondering why he didn't say goodbye properly. Why he seemed so distant in his last few months. Now I'm hearing he was hiding something. And I don't even understand what." Elizabeth took a step closer. "Margaret, he wasn't hiding love. He was hiding pain. There's something else you need to see." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old envelope, slightly torn at the edges. "He gave me this to hold on to. He said, 'When Margaret is ready to forgive me, give her this.'" Margaret's voice broke. "Forgive him for what?" Elizabeth hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think only he could explain that." Margaret opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter and a small photograph. The photo showed David, much younger, standing next to Elizabeth in front of an old beach house. They weren't touching, but the way he looked at her was clear. Her chest tightened. "He loved you." Elizabeth's lips parted, but no sound came out for a moment. Finally, she said, "Not the way you think. He cared for me, yes, but not as a boyfriend or anything like that. I was his friend, someone he could talk to. He used to say, 'Margaret deserves more than what I can give her right now.' He felt guilty that he was getting weaker while you still had so much life ahead of you." Margaret clutched the photo, her hands shaking. "He never said that to me. Not once." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "He couldn't. He said if he told you, you would stop living for yourself and start living only for him. And he didn't want that. Tears blurred Margaret's vision. The pain was real and sharp, but underneath it was something else. A strange sense of peace starting to grow. She unfolded the letter. David's handwriting moved across the page, shaky but still readable. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage I didn't have when I was alive. I know I drifted away from you, and I know you noticed. It wasn't because of you. It was because of fear. I couldn't stand to see the sadness in your eyes every time I couldn't keep up with the man I used to be. So I painted you instead. Every stroke was a conversation I couldn't have with you. Every color was a word I didn't say. And when I was too weak to hold a brush anymore, I left those words with Elizabeth because she promised she would give them to you when the time was right. If you ever wonder what my last thought was, it was you. Always you. The letter slipped from her hands. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. Thomas knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Mum, he whispered. He loved you more than you ever knew. She shook her head, crying harder. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he let me in? Elizabeth's voice was soft. Because he didn't want you to remember him as a dying man. He wanted you to remember the way he painted you, the way he saw you, not the way life left him at the end. Margaret couldn't speak. The emotions came crashing over her like ocean waves. Love, anger, longing, grief. She had spent half her life waiting for words that had existed all along, hidden behind paint and locked away in someone else's keeping. Elizabeth stepped closer and handed her one more item, a small wrapped box. This was with the letter, she said. He told me to give it to Thomas when he was grown, but I think he meant for both of you to see it. Thomas unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small brass key. Margaret frowned. A key? Elizabeth nodded. David said it belonged to something in your house. He never told me what. Margaret's heart began to pound again. Something in the house. But there's nothing locked there. Not that I know of. Thomas looked at her. Then we'll find it together. Elizabeth smiled faintly. When you do, you'll understand everything. The room fell silent again. Margaret looked around at all the paintings. Her life was scattered across these canvases. Her love preserved in color and light. Each painting felt alive now. Not just art, but memory. David's hands had touched them. His heart had lived in them. She turned to Elizabeth. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping this safe. Elizabeth nodded. It wasn't mine to keep. It was always yours. Margaret and Thomas left the gallery as night fell over the city. The cool air touched her face, but she barely felt it. The letter, the key, the truth, they all pressed heavy against her heart. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't just miss David. She felt him again, close and near. In the car, Thomas drove quietly while Margaret stared at the key in her palm. It sparkled faintly under the passing streetlights. Do you think he hid something at home? She asked softly. Maybe, Thomas said. Or maybe it's symbolic, like the key to forgiveness. She gave a small, tired smile. Maybe, but it feels real. When they reached home, she placed the key on the kitchen table. The house felt different now, like the walls were listening and waiting. She looked around at every familiar corner, at every painting David had hung himself years ago. Thomas leaned against the doorway. Mum, we can start looking tomorrow. You should get some rest. She nodded, though her mind wouldn't rest. That night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Margaret lay in bed awake, turning the key over in her hand. What could it open? A drawer? A box? A door? Or something deeper? Thunder rolled in the distance. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of David's message. It was only the beginning. As lightning flashed across the room, lighting up the portrait David had painted of her. Margaret noticed something she had never seen before. There was a faint, narrow line along the bottom of the frame, like a tiny hidden compartment built into the wood. Her heart skipped a beat. The key in her hand glinted again in the lightning flash. She sat up slowly, her breath trembling. Could it be? She reached for the portrait, her fingers shaking as she touched the hidden seam. The storm grew louder outside, but inside, the only sound was her whisper, barely audible, full of fear and hope. "David, what did you leave me?" By morning, the storm had passed, leaving only the smell of rain and wet earth. Margaret stood before the portrait, the brass key warm in her palm. With Thomas beside her, she carefully pressed the hidden seam. With a soft click, a small compartment slid open. Inside was a single item, a leather journal, worn and filled with pages of David's handwriting. She opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, "For Margaret, these are the words I couldn't say. The conversations we never had. The life I wish I had been brave enough to live fully with you. I'm sorry I waited until it was too late. But know this, every sunrise I painted was you. Every ocean I captured was the depth of what I felt. And every unfinished canvas was my fear of never being enough. You were always enough for me. I hope someday I will have been enough for you." Margaret's tears fell onto the pages, but she didn't stop reading. Page after page, David had written to her. Memories, confessions, dreams, apologies, and above all, love. Thomas read over her shoulder, his own eyes wet with tears. "He wrote this for you. All of it." In the back of the journal was one final entry, dated the day before he died. "I am not afraid anymore, because I know that love doesn't end when we do. It transforms. It lives in the people we touched, the art we created, the moments we shared. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to me. And that's all I ever wanted. For you to know you were never alone. I was always with you in every sunset, every wave, every quiet moment. And I always will be." Margaret closed the journal and held it to her chest. For the first time since David's death, she felt complete. Not because the pain was gone, but because she finally understood. He had never truly left. He had simply been waiting for her to find him again. Thomas hugged her tightly. "He loved you, Mom, so much." "I know," she whispered. "And I loved him. I still do." As the morning sun streamed through the windows, Margaret looked at David's portrait one last time. She smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she said softly, "for never giving up on us." And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, she felt him smile back. The end was not an ending at all. It was a continuation, proof that love, when true and deep, never truly dies. It simply waits, patient and eternal, for the moment we are finally ready to hear it again.